Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
Are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast. Today we are talking about business sales from a seller's perspective. So I have on this episode a special guest who I think it is fair to say is a guru in online marketing, James Schramko from SuperFastBusiness.com. So welcome along, James.
Thanks for having me, and I think pretty much anyone who's an expert in any market outside of Indian-style things doesn't love the name guru. I certainly don't call myself that. It doesn't say that on my front door.
Got it. Okay, all right. So not the guru in online marketing then, James Schramko. How about that? Is that a better intro, James?
I don't know. It's probably equally as bad just because it could be misleading and deceptive. But it's funny. It's like those words thought leader and stuff. They seem a little bit wanky. But I have bought and sold a few businesses and built some. So if that's what we're talking about, I'm in my comfort zone.
That's what we're talking about today. So you have bought and sold two businesses that you built from the ground up. And so I guess I wanted you on our show today to talk specifically about how that process went from a seller's perspective. Because when I first met you, I think you just recently sold, as I said, not but one, but two businesses that you've been building for many years. And for many business owners, that's the pivotal point that they have been building to forever in their business. And then sometimes they retire, but then sometimes they'll continue on and do things after that. But often it's years and years of building businesses before business owners really understand what it's like to sell their business and what the important elements are that they should be thinking of as they're growing their businesses. But maybe we can start off perhaps by you giving us a little bit of background before we begin about what your businesses were that you sold.
Sure. Well, one business was a website development business, and other people might call it a WordPress shop if you're in the industry. It's basically we just built websites for people. And then the other business was a search engine optimization company, and by the end of its life cycle, I was mostly providing wholesale SEO services to other people who were reselling that as agencies to end customers. And in some cases, they were even reselling it to other bigger agencies who were selling it to end customers. So we were the supply source. We were creating the SEO at the raw source. So they're the two businesses. One was much larger than the other one. The SEO business was significantly larger. And both of them had been running for around about 7 years in different iterations. I didn't start with those. I just ended up growing them. One of them was out of a need for me in the beginning, and then my customers continually needed websites. So that made sense. And I'd already started, when I started online, which was about 12 years ago, I used to sell a lot of website development software. And when that software was starting to become superseded, we needed a solution to make our websites. So I started contracting some suppliers and they were good. And then I brought it in-house. We did this vertical integration. And then I ended up with this team of 10 developers and we built thousands of websites. So that was that one. The SEO one, quite an interesting one because I used to be very good at SEO when I started online. I learnt that skill and I loved the immediate satisfaction of knowing I've done a good job. If I could type something to Google and they ranked my site first, then I was getting a tick. And it's kind of this appraisal machine, if you like. It'll say, yes, you've done well, or no, you haven't. And once I got the knack of it, I started doing this for clients. And then I wanted to have more than one or two clients. So I needed to get some supply. And this company actually overseas approached me to contract their supply to me. And I was actually running a workshop and we were looking for an idea to create a business. And the students there didn't really have any useful ideas. So I said, how about we create an SEO service? So right there and then in this workshop, live over 2 days, I started this SEO business from scratch using the external supply. And then over time, my team who were building all the websites, they got really good at SEO as well. And then we took over the work from the contractors and vertically integrated that. And I ended up with my own team. So with both of these companies and my existing coaching business, we ended up having over 60 people directly working for us full time.
That's a significant number of staff then that you have to think about in the transition process as you're considering a sale, I guess. So were there any specific issues that you hadn't been expecting in relation to that staffing side or preparing for transition as you were looking to sell these businesses?
I think I navigated it well because I did a lot of research. One of the things I did was interview a lot of business brokers on my own podcast so that I could ask them a zillion questions and learn all the ins and outs and the gotchas and the traps and what the mechanics of selling a business are. I've also been involved in almost selling my business and almost buying a few businesses and actually buying and selling businesses before. So I'd seen the process run out. So I actually prepared myself quite well. With the teams, I indicated to them quite early that these business units were going to be sold and that I would be considering how they're going to migrate to the new owner of the business. And I actually rejected an offer from somebody who was actually one of our original sort of contractors, wanted to buy my SEO business, and they had no intention of taking the team. They were just going to cut the team and keep the customers and the business and then bring that business into their own business. And I rejected that deal because I didn't want my team to be made redundant. So I made a values-based decision there. So one of my selling criteria was that the buyer would offer everyone in the business a job in the new iteration of the business, because I'd already realized that generally when someone buys the business, they're going to it's going to be more of an asset sale where they're going to take the bits they want, and it's a good opportunity for them to leave the bits they don't want. And I wanted to make sure that my team was set up properly because they'd become very important to me, and culturally I think it's a good thing to do.
And so then you told your staff before you even started looking for a buyer. Is that how the order of progression went?
I think the order of progression is on a macro scale. I've before I even left my job 9 years ago, I knew that I wanted to create an asset. I needed to build my own business, and I wanted the business to be beyond just a job-like function, which is what a lot of people tend to do. They just build themselves a job or buy a franchise. So I always had this idea of building an asset. So from the very beginning, I built this thing as if it's going to be something I could sell. And then I went through this phase of why would I sell? So I read a few books about selling businesses. I read Built to Sell, and I read another book by a guy called Garson, which was along the lines of building a business to sell. And they talked about the reasons why you would and wouldn't sell, and this inevitable situation you get to when you're just about to sell and you feel like you don't really want to, or it's scary. But I also went through this phase where, you know what, the website development business is definitely not my passion, and it started to make me quite angry at times because I'm not a website developer, and website developers are a special breed of human. They tend to be attracted to technical roles because they're not often great with communications with people. So they're quite shy and they prefer to hide behind a keyboard, and they like to just think in zeros and ones, and they can be difficult to communicate with, and they drive me crazy if they're messing a customer around or just hiding from the customer and these sort of things. So I wanted to sell it. I just basically came up with this feeling that the business was not worth having because it didn't make me happy. Even though it was making me good profit, my life wasn't better off because of this business. I'd be better off without it. So at that point, yes, I communicated to the team that at some point we're going to package this thing up and we'll find an appropriate buyer. And I'm looking for a buyer who's going to take them on, and that it would be a good opportunity for them because whoever takes on this business is definitely going to be more passionate about the business than I am, and that they should celebrate this, because the other option is that I just wind it down if I can't find a buyer, and that's not really winning for me. Definitely not good for my pride. It's not good for my bank balance, and it's not good for my team. It took us a little while, but not too long, to field some buyers and to find the right buyer. And we were able to migrate the whole team across. And, you know, even now, a year and a half later, most of them, the significantly good ones, are all still there. And a couple haven't made it past that point. But also, you know, when we handed over the team, I also handed over my notes as to, you know, who's who and who should be kept at all costs and who maybe should be checking on their performance because they're marginal. And so I sort of gave my performance notes across. Like, here's the team, but this is what you want to watch out for.
It's really interesting hearing your approach to this, because the clients that we deal with appear to be in one of two camps, either your camp or the other camp, which is this veil of secrecy around the the whole sale process and the prospect that there will be a sale, which of course can create issues, I think, often for buyers who are coming in when the staff then become aware of the transaction. And of course, staff then don't feel at all a part of the process if they are finding out essentially when the deal's done and when the new buyer is about to walk in the doors. It's really interesting the way you talk about it, because I think it's a good approach, and certainly it's a better approach, I believe, to create a better end result for the buyer of the business at the end of the day.
And I think I also approached it in terms of seniority. So with the much larger business where there was 38 people involved in that, obviously my huge risk and concern is that if they don't like this idea of going to work for someone else, they might just all quit, and then my asset goes up in smoke. I mean, we don't have plant and equipment in our business. It's completely online. So if the team doesn't want to work for the new owner, they could just go and get another job and leave me with nothing. No buyer and no business. So I definitely approached the senior level early and built them into the idea of how this will work and gave them reassurances, my word really, that they're going to get at least the same scenario they're on now or a more favourable one. And then we went down a few layers, and then closer to the sale, then the last batch will know. But you need to balance that fine line between scaring people off or shocking them. And especially in the culture that we predominantly working with, which is in the Philippines culture, they don't deal well with surprises. And I'd say even in the Western world, employees generally don't like to get too surprised. It's nice to feel like you've been an insider than an outsider in your own company.
Yeah, and you talk about the specifics of an online business, but I really think everything that you're talking about here is as relevant to any service business, not just online businesses. Any business where there's a high dependency on the staff and the staff staying on and the knowledge bank of those staff in a new buyer taking on the business into the future. So what surprised, if anything, what surprised you about the process? Obviously, you had done a lot of research before the sale, as you've spoken about, to understand the whole sale process. But was there anything in the process that you found surprising?
I think I'd sort of anticipated most of the things, but I imagine the things that might surprise other people would be that almost always when you're selling a business, there can be a sliding scale of how easy or difficult it is for handing over that business or agreeing before you hand over it, but agreeing on the sale terms. So there's obviously the issue of price, and then there's what do you actually get, and then there's the legal paperwork side of it and the trust factor and the payment terms. These sort of things can get interesting. Generally, I've found you can get green lights through most of the process, and then one or two things will stick or hang to the point where you almost call it off. It's happened to me a few times, and I now look for that. And I think it would probably shock first-time sellers that you can all seem like it's going great, and then there's one little hook or gotcha or third party or legal technicality or advice from a lawyer or accountant that throws a curly one through the system. I've experienced a couple of times where you get right to that last little bit when you're really hoping it's all done and dusted, and there's this one more sticking point, and it makes you feel frustrated, and you can obviously, oh gosh, like so close, and then these little things happen. So I would expect that. Look out for it. You're also going to go through a lot of emotion, because through the process of making your business very attractive for someone to buy, as an entrepreneur, we often see all the opportunity and all the extra potential, because to sell a business, often we're going to show the buyer how much potential there is just lurking under the hood that could be tapped with very little effort. And then we start thinking, well, what if I keep it and do these things? Am I insane? Would I buy this business? And sometimes we'd say, yeah, I'd actually buy this business. Why am I selling it? And we get right to that sort of psychological battle of having to let go. So I looked for other reasons why I'm selling to really reinforce that, which are also great ways to help your team feel good about it too. So for me, a significant one was the split focus that I had between multiple business divisions. And I know that whoever was buying a business, if they just focused on that, could do a better job with it than what I was doing, spending a fraction of my time on the business. Then I look at other things like, if I keep the business and things don't change or the market changes unfavorably, I could significantly reduce my asset here. So it's time to get out for that. But I would just say the biggest surprise people could expect is for things not to run smoothly throughout the process.
You pick up on a number of things that I have seen time and time again. The whole area of business sale is actually quite an emotional process for many people. In fact, most buyers and sellers, because there's this wave of commitment and non-commitment sometimes by the seller or the vendor as they wave in and out of this, wanting to sell but to be on their own terms, and then perhaps suddenly not feeling like they may want to sell. And from the buyer's perspective, concern about risk. So, and this is often the emotional roller coaster for a buyer, often a concern about risk as they go through the process. Fascinating hearing you talk about it from your perspective, because that's certainly what I witnessed from my side of the fence. And did you end up using a broker? You talked about having brokers on your podcast to talk about as you got to understand the sale process before you went through a sale. So what was your decision at the end of the day in relation to how you conducted your sale?
For me, selling is a strength, and it turns out that I knew the buyers, so there was no need for a broker. The only thing a broker might have offered me is potential exposure to more buyers for a fee, of course, and they might have also held my hand if I wasn't so strong with the process. So I think a broker makes a lot of sense in many scenarios. It's just, in my case, I'm okay with the process of buying and selling, and I had the buyers. So there was less requirement for a broker. But of course, they educated me tremendously, and I was able to exchange huge value for them too and give them exposure by being on my podcast. So because of speaking to the brokers and preparing checklists, I already had a pretty comprehensive asset register, like a list of everything that's going to be included in the sale, which really was an indicator of what sort of things could potentially go wrong. So we were able to cover off our bases. For example, when you list down the email database, then that reminds you that you're going to have to communicate the sale properly to them. And when you list all the website properties, you're going to have the reminder to transfer from one server to another successfully. And when you list down the payment methods, then you've got to remember things like how to migrate shopping carts and set up. All of those things ran quite smoothly because we had listed them all out in advance and worked them off literally as a checklist. I actually opened up a document that I shared with the buyers, separate buyers for each business, and went through the checklist of all these things, and we just tick, 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 tick by certain timelines until it was effectively completely handed over. And that just left a tiny little inconvenience of some money shuffles every now and then. So twice a month I have to send off some money that I collect in trust for legacy accounts that were in PayPal or my credit card facility that customers just stick into because of how long ago I set up the business. I didn't have a Stripe account that I could have just handed over. It's really, really hard to hand over a PayPal account versus a Stripe account. So if I were to do this all again, I would probably have a separate entity for any business that's collecting a significant amount of money and have its own bank account, and then you could just hand over the lot.
Very sensible advice. I think that makes transition a lot easier. And how about your accountant? Because the Deal Room, many of our listeners are brokers and accountants as well as businesses that are buying and selling. Were there any recommendations that you would have for accountants who are dealing with businesses in the sale process about the sorts of things that you were looking to your accountant for assistance in?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got to have an accountant and a lawyer involved in this process, you'll be pleased to hear. From the accountant's perspective, obviously, the buyer is going to want to see the numbers. So you absolutely have to have your numbers in shape. You've got to have your profit and loss. You've got to know all your income sources. It's all got to be up to date. Tax returns, all that sort of stuff would be good verifiable data or data, depending where you are. You also have to be able to sort of show historical financials. So you've got to go back for years. And the other thing that's really important and maybe not talked about so often is how you treat the sale from a financial perspective can make a significant difference. So in Australia, having the business in a certain entity can make a big difference. And then you can also, depending on the business size, there are huge things that you can do that if you have a good accountant, they can tell you about. In my case, I was able to put a large lump sum of sale price into my superannuation or as Americans will call a 401k, and get a capital gains discount. So basically, your accountant can help you pay less tax on the sale amount by telling you where is a good place to put it. The motivation isn't to save on tax necessarily, but it's about putting that money in the right area that's going to work better for you in the long term. So for me, at my age and with the way things are set up, it's quite nice for me to have a little lump sum sitting there in the background at a lower tax rate than burning all that cash right now in my bank account. So there's that side of it. And then from the legal perspective, I think sale contract would be a very good idea. And often, if someone is coming to you with the offer and the contract, it will almost always be stacked a little bit in their favour. So your legal representative will be able to help you even it out a little bit too. And so I've found quite often you'll have to do some education with your buyer to explain to them that their lawyer is being a little bit over the top greedy, that their lawyer's version of what they want is all biased towards them having zero risk. And then you explain to them that when you're actually buying a business, there will be some risk. And that if the lawyer can't be more flexible on that, there will not be a sale on those terms. So it's really now a question of, are you buying or not? Not that there's any chance in hell that I would accept those terms.
I think a lot of the important element in making sure these deals get across the line is good communication. Good communication skills is really fundamental to being able to navigate this argy-bargy between the fact that draft contracts often will be biased to one side, but there's a reality both parties are trying to get the deal across the line at the end of the day. In a way that has to work in some way for both parties, otherwise the deal won't get across the line. I guess, what's your advice to business owners in relation to when to sell? And I think this is an age-old question because many business owners, when they go into business, are thinking about going into the business, but they're not thinking about the exit of the business. If they don't think early enough about the exit element, often they are in the situation where they might have to exit quicker than they planned and they're not able to then prepare their business properly for exit, and that can impact the sale price. When do you think business owners should think about selling or preparing for sale?
Right now, today, they should know their number immediately.
And how do you view that then in your current businesses? Are you building your current businesses now to sell one day in the future?
One of my businesses is 100% built to sell today. I would take a check for it today and hand it over. And here's your website, here's the customers, and maybe some SOPs, and possibly even a team member to go with it. That's potentially a scenario. So I've built that one to sell. There's zero personal input from me on that on that project. My other businesses are definitely more tied to me. However, if someone cut me a check for the right amount, they could have the lot, and I would put in a plan to migrate it out of being so personally dependent on me. And I nearly sold one of them before, and I also tested a different way of doing business for the other one, and it was a success. So I actually feel that if I had a long enough lead time, which I think would probably be around 2 years to 3 years, I could migrate myself completely out of the business. But I would definitely take a check for it now and then pay it off for, do the work for 2 to 3 years if the check was enough. So I think it's good to know what your number is. And the number might be what you would plan to sell it for in the future. And if you could get that today without having to do all that work, then why not?
Well, that's a really good point, isn't it? Why not? That's it.
It's just a number. It's like if I said to you, I'd like to buy your house, you'd probably say, well, no thanks. You're all set up, your kids are there, it's comfortable, it's convenient, you've got your own plants in the garden and all that, you decorated. And then I might say, well, what if I cut you a check for $10 million? You might start thinking, maybe I would sell my house for $10 million. And now, without knowing exactly where you live, and I'm presuming you probably don't live in a $10 million house, but I might be wrong. If it's like double the value of what it would be worth to anyone else, you might think, well, gosh, that's enough for me to build my dream home from scratch in a bigger property right next door or whatever. You might think, okay, well, I'll roll with that. So it really does come down to a number with the business. And then it's just a matter of how much has to be changed for it to work for someone else. Like how much of a business is it versus a job?
You've talked about building a business to sell. And of course, that is the mantra generally in relation to businesses that are intended one day for sale. But what does that actually mean to you in relation to how you approach building your businesses or coaching businesses now? Because obviously that's one of the things that you do at the moment, which is coach businesses.
It means that it works without you. That's a business you can sell.
That's nice and simple, isn't it?
Yeah. If it doesn't work without you, it's a bit more job-like, and you definitely have to allow a commercial salary for whatever it is that you do in the business. But if you're a consultant with a team of one and you want to sell that, then the entire income is tied to your input, which means your commercial salary is pretty much the profit of the business. So you'll have a very low multiple, maybe of 1 or less, and it will be a hard sell to find a buyer who wants that job. That's almost what franchises are.
Yeah. And so what are you doing differently now, if anything, in your current businesses in light of anything that you discovered as part of the sale process of your previous 2 businesses?
Mostly around just handling money, but most other things I think we covered well. Like you would have in your website terms and agreements that the database could be transferred to a buyer if the business was sold. These sort of things that might be gotchas for other people. So anything that collects money, I think it's got to have its own account. That would be ideal. And we document every process in our business so that if we did sell one of our websites tomorrow, we could hand over the user manual and say, here's how it works. So it's all there.
Yep. Okay. And then I guess just to round it up then, do you have any general advice that you'll give to businesses that are looking to sell in the future in relation to the sale process as a whole, or in particular increasing their sale value for that final day of the sale?
Yes, I would say think about, after you've thought about your number, think about who this business is going to be perfect for and start building it for them in advance before you even tell them. It's like Apple making an iPod before people knew they needed an iPod. A great buyer for your business would be the person who should have built what you built for them. It's perfect for them. And they just look at it and think, oh, we need that. Like Facebook buying WhatsApp or Instagram. They're saying, oh, we should have done that. Let's buy this business. So build your business with the perfect buyer in mind. And that's, if I retrospectively look at the businesses I sold my businesses to people who really needed what I had, but wanted to shortcut the path to getting it. Instead of waiting several years and going around it the hard way, they could just acquire it instantly for some money.
Thank you so much for your time today, James. Just a quick recap. In this episode, we talked about business sales from a seller's perspective. James Schramko from SuperFastBusiness.com walked us through many of the elements that were relevant to him as he built and sold his businesses. And many of the elements that he talked about, I think, are really important for our business listeners to bear in mind about building your business with the sale in mind at the end of the day, bringing your team along with you, building checklists of the steps to transition the business once you've got the buyer in place, being aware of surprises in the process, and that surprises will occur along the way, and that you have to ensure that you're aware of that so you don't allow that to derail you in the process. Knowing your number that you're aiming for, and essentially building your business with the perfect buyer in mind. So thanks, James, so much for coming along. I think it's been a really useful discussion today. Where can people find out more about your businesses?
Well, SuperFastBusiness.com is a great place to start because that's where I publish lots of information. There's several podcasts on this topic that can be found in the list of all the podcast episodes or the search tool. You might also find your good self there. I think we did a series about this because it's so important. Yeah, that's part of my education process, was getting information from the very best.
And if you'd like more information about this topic, you can head over to superfastbusiness.com and check out some of James's podcasts, or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you will be able to get a link to James and superfastbusiness.com, and you'll also be able to download a transcript of this podcast episode if you'd like to read it in more detail. There you'll also find details of how to contact our lawyers at Aspect Legal if you or your clients would like to discuss any legal aspects of sales or acquisitions. We've got a great range of services that help businesses both prepare for a sale or acquisition and also to help guide businesses through the sale and acquisitions process. So finally, if you enjoyed what you heard today, please pop over to iTunes and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening in. This is Joanna on the dealroompodcast.com and James Schramko. See you next time.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room Podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.